All right, everybody, welcome. We're so happy to hear from you today. I'm Robert Diane. I teach American government at the University of Evansville.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Zach Eastburn. I am an attorney in Madison, Wisconsin.
And I am Tom Tinder, and I'm an attorney from Charleston, West Virginia. Welcome.
I'm Seth Suruglisser.
I'm Jack Loudon.
And I'm Andrzej Korolatsky.
Terrific. So I'm going to read question 2 to you today, and it's all about legislative oversight, and we're eager to hear what you have to say. The question reads as follows. Members of Congress are not only legislators, but they, quote, are also inquisitorial and should meet frequently to inspect the conduct of the public officers, close quote. How effectively do you believe Congress has used its investigatory power? Explain the differences, if any, between Congress's power to investigate and the power of oversight. Which power, in your opinion, is more significant? Finally, how effectively do you believe Congress has used its oversight powers? You may begin.
Since the ratification of the Constitution in 1788, Congress has become more willing to exercise their power to investigate. Although the Constitution doesn't specifically outline the investigatory powers of Congress, Article 1, Section 1 states that all legislative powers herein granted shall be vested in a Congress of the United States, which shall consist of the Senate and the House of Representatives. This means that powers do not delegate to either the judiciary branch or the executive branch lie in the hands of Congress. Overall, we would argue that the Congress has used its investigatory powers effectively. To start, Congress has exercised inquisitorial powers in two key ways. The first is through the subpoena power. A subpoena is a writ issued by a government agency, most often a court, to compel testimony by a witness or production of evidence under penalty for failure. Although many have contested Congress's use of subpoena power to conduct hearings stating that the power is oppressive, courts have continually upheld the practice. The second way Congress exercises inquisitorial powers is through contempt of Congress. This power means that Congress has authority to hold a person in contempt if the person's conduct or action obstructs the proceedings of Congress, or more usually an inquiry by a committee of Congress and is outlined in Statute 2 USCA and 192. Both contempt of Congress and the subpoena power go hand in hand because often people under investigation obstruct proceedings by not complying with subpoenas.
Over the 20th and 21st centuries, Congress has greatly expanded the role of investigatory powers. For example, Congress has been investigating labor conditions, and through these investigations, they created the Fair Labor Standards Act of 1938. Recently, Congress has started an investigation into the Capitol riots, which took place during January, in order to see if any public officers facilitated the riots. Overall, Congress has demonstrated effectiveness with its use of investigatory power, which has led to many important new laws to be put in place. The main difference between a congressional investigation versus congressional oversight is generally investigations are in place to find wrongdoing, while oversight is just general bureaucratic issues that need to be addressed. Congressional oversight has been around since the first Congress, with the passage of the 1789 Act creating the Treasury Department, in which Congress outlined the Secretary must make, report, and give information to either branch of the legislature. This clearly shows Congress has used its oversight powers in order to monitor departments and agencies and make sure the cogs of bureaucracy are running efficiently. Another example of congressional oversight would be the Reagan administration in the 80s dealing with the Environmental Protection Agency. A Republican-held Congress felt the agency was going out of line with regulation, and using oversight powers were able to narrow the regulatory power of the agency. Congressional investigations generally deal with any wrongdoing within the government. Arguably, the most famous of these investigations would be the Watergate Committee, because the legislature's branch was quickly able to investigate the scandal just days after its occurrence, demonstrating the swiftness of the investigatory powers.
Now, both powers are extremely powerful and they're vital to the legislative process. However, one thing is clear. With the current political polarization in our country, both have been impacted, but congressional investigations have been the most. Since inherently congressional investigations are meant to weed out wrongdoing in the government, they have become political, and as politics have become more polarized, investigations become more partisan and less effective. For example, major congressional investigations into the wrongdoings of former Presidents Clinton and Trump both yield partisan splits that resulted in no punishment to either politician. Overall, Congress has generally been used its oversight powers well. The biggest flaw, however, within the oversight powers of Congress is that they do not have the manpower to handle it on their own. So they turn to outside help, usually lobbyists, which inherently makes things more political, as lobbyists tend to have an agenda. Furthermore, oversight, just as the rest of the government in recent years, has been plagued by a huge partisan divide. Former President Donald Trump decried the oversight into his campaign and ties with Russian intelligence as a witch hunt, and most of the Republican Party agreed. As the country becomes more and more polarized, the less effective Congress's oversight powers become. In conclusion, we think that Congress uses investigative and oversight powers in a mostly effective manner. However, due to the increased partisan divide in Congress and in the government as a whole, the less effective and powerful these powers will become.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm intrigued by what you had to say about polarization and politicization. Can you flesh out a little bit how you can distinguish a partisan investigation from a legitimate investigation?
Well, I think when we are talking about like partisan splits, I think what we're mostly talking about here is like, so we see in both Trump impeachment trials and the Clinton impeachment trial that they were split completely on party lines. So we're not necessarily saying that these investigations are witch hunts. We're rather saying that when the government finds wrongdoing, it seems that these wrongdoings are never really brought to justice because of partisan split in our current political climate.
And to add to that, with polarization, some people will favor like a leader that holds their views or holds the same views as they do. So even if they did commit something that is against like the laws of the United States, the result of the trial won't be will be partisan because of the nature of the U.S. government.
I think a perfect example of what both Seth and Jack talked about could be specifically looking at the second impeachment trial of former President Trump, where even at the point where wrongdoing was admitted by many members of the Republican Party, even the Senate Majority Leader McConnell at the time, ultimately found that they chose to acquit him despite the possibility of wrongdoing given his role in the insurrection riot at the Capitol building on January 6th.
So let's talk a little bit about, you guys mentioned Article 1, Section 8, and this idea that Congress has it is Congress's function to make law, and that shouldn't be delegated to the executive branch or the judicial branches. But we also have this administrative state out here in the executive branch, and they do a lot of different things. The EPA will make regulations about the environment. Some might say that that is law. Do you think that the administrative state in the executive branch is a violation of separation of powers?
I would as a whole contend that not necessarily is it a violation of powers, specifically when we tie in the ideas of oversight investigations by Congress. The Congress is generally responsible for making the laws upon which the agencies of the executive, such as the EPA, FBI, whatever it may be, enforce these laws. Now, because of specific circumstances and how these laws may be applied to different instances, ultimately some of that leeway is given to the executive for the sake of having efficiency in the government. However, ultimately, if Congress disagrees, they have the ability to oversee. And as we saw with the EPA in the 1980s, restrictions upon the power to set regulation can be imposed by new laws.
And another important idea to add is that iron triangles play a large role in this, where we have the bureaucracy, Congress, and lobbyists. So Congress makes the laws, and then the different agencies enforce that. And we wouldn't say this is an overstep of the executive's power, because they are enforcing the laws, and Congress can shoot down any enforcement that they don't agree with. So as such, we still say that there's definitely a separation of powers.
You, at your ending, you talked about that Congress is becoming less effective. Well, based upon your research, in your opinion, how can Congress become more effective with their oversight and investigatory powers?
I mean, the simple answer to that would be somehow we have to be less polarized, and we'd have to hold each other to a higher standard. And right now, I don't know if there's a truly good solution, just how polarized we've become, that it's just like, basically, if you're a Democrat, that is how you completely identify, and you do not want to converse or debate with the other side of the aisle. And so somehow we are going to have to get to the point where we have to get back to where both parties respect each other, and both need to know that, like, we need to hold each other to a standard, and the rule of law needs to stand in the government, and politics can't get in the way of what we have founded as our country.
And one possible implementation for this would be creating a distinct committee of Congress that has people who are used to understanding laws and interpreting laws and how people may violate those laws. So their decision might be more neutral. That would still fall under Congress's inquisitorial powers, but I guess it would be more. It would be a lot less biased than having an entire Congress vote on issues like that.
What happens if the bureaucracy stubbornly doesn't want to respond or work with the legislative branch? What kind of tools does the legislative branch have to try to compel good relations with the bureaucracy?
Well, ultimately, as we mentioned during our 4-minute speech, in the event that, say, public officials of the executive seek to obstruct investigations by Congress, ultimately the subpoenas can be used to compel testimony, as well as holding these individuals in contempt as punishment, as are methods through which the legislature can encourage compliance by the executive, especially when relations aren't the best. However, we would say that as a whole, the interactions between the bureaucracy and the legislature are key to making sure that either one can function, given the interreliance between the two.
And we also saw with Trump's first impeachment trial, we saw that the Democratic-led House added another article impeachment after Trump refused to hand over certain information after subpoenas were called. So we also see that Congress can also use impeachment if need be, if they're going to refuse subpoenas and whatnot.
Is there anything beyond subpoenas and impeachment? That seems like a rather drastic response to, I don't know, slow walking by the bureaucratic agency.
Other than that, Congress is somewhat limited in how much control they have over the agencies, because a lot of the heads of the agencies can't really, it's just very difficult to impeach them or get them out of office. So that is one of the major stalemates that we have, especially if there's a divided executive branch and a divided Congress.
Okay, thank you.
What would be, so I know we've talked about some of the failures of Congress's ability to investigate, but I understand from your opening statement that your position is that by and large it has effectively used investigations, and I'm wondering, do you guys have a contemporary example, a more recent example of a successful use of investigation or oversight, and why is that a successful example or a good example?
Well, one example that we would argue is successful, or like an successful approach to inquisitorial powers, is the recent Trump impeachment trial. Even though the outcome wasn't exactly what a lot of people intended, we'd say that the swiftness of the trial is it demonstrates the effectiveness of the inquisitorial powers, because just days after the Trump or the massive riot on Capitol Hill, the Congress is able to convene and use their inquisitorial powers to see if they should impeach Donald Trump.
Not only that, but beyond the president himself, currently Congress is in the process of looking into investigations of other public officials related to the riots and whether they may have played a role, as well as any efficiencies such as during the Capitol Police or the National Guard in the slow response. As such, I would contend that right now, because of these investigations, the way of trying to hold these officials accountable to their action or inaction on that day.
Now, the most important question that we have for you today, and I want to phrase this in such a way.
Well done.
Job.
Yay! Great job, guys.
Well, thank you, gentlemen. That was a good performance, and I appreciated hearing from you. Very clear right from the get-go. Very well stated, thoroughgoing. The business of the contempt of Congress and the subpoenas, I thought, was an effective beginning. You answered the question as it was posed to distinguish between investigations and oversight, and I thought your answer on that was good. And at the very end, you talked about insufficient manpower. The larger problem is one of expertise and manpower, and we cut congressional staff 20-something years ago, and they've never gotten back to those levels before you were born. So staff are overworked and overwhelmed in a lot of ways. I'm on the Q&A, there were some moments that were especially strong, and then there were some other moments where I think part of the problem is the question is a little confused because they commingle investigation and oversight, but a lot of your answers went straight to impeachment as the go-to answer for everything. But oversight in general is a very boring and mundane and nonpartisan function of the Congress as far as the ways that laws are being carried out and the effectiveness of the implementation. So I would have appreciated a little bit more of that and a little bit less of Donald Trump facing impeachment, because that's a very rare occurrence, although it happened twice for him. I'll grant you that. But on balance, I thought it was a solid presentation and a solid Q&A session. So you've thought carefully about this, and the answer that you gave about giving leeway to agencies, that was Zach's question. I don't want to steal his thunder, but that was a textbook perfect answer to why we do this. Congress on purpose has understood that the agencies know more, but then you followed up very quickly with the idea that if they stray too far off, Congress has all sorts of ways to bring them back around. But I would have liked a little more discussion of the ways that they can bring them back around besides impeachment. Something like the power of the purse, for example, or mandatory reporting, or appearing before committees short of an investigation, but just appearing to report on the progress of legislation. I don't want to take too much time. Hats off to you guys. You did a nice job today.
Yeah, just to follow up on that, I think I agree. You guys had a very clear position. What I liked about the sort of structure, the syntactical way that you went about it, was you had it at the beginning, and then you might be the first thing that I've seen sort of button it up at the end to say, in conclusion, we think it's been effective, but less so as time goes on because of hyperpartisanship. So that was a nice touch. It was a nice way to finish it, and it rang in my ears. And then we went into question and answer. So hats off to you on that. I think, so to my question, I agree with Robert on how you answered it. You gave probably the most cogent answer on the violation of separation of powers in favor of agencies, which is to say, look, this gets down to the sort of bedrock principles of what do you view the Constitution as? Do you view it as this sort of living document, or is this just this is the black and white law? I mean, if you read Article 1, Section 8, it's Congress shall have the power to make all laws that are necessary and proper, blah, 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 blah. So there is an argument out there to say, what is this? What is the executive agency? What are they doing? And you gave me the answer, which is it's efficient. Congress does have oversight. It is not a violation of separation of powers because the executive branch is not making law. They're executing what Congress has enshrined. Great answer. What I would have liked to see would have been the counterpoint on that, which is there's a black and white, clear as crystal answer to this, and it's in this document, the Constitution, and it says nothing about the executive agency or executives having agencies and having regulations. And I also agree. I think the answers were a little bit focused on the impeachment piece of that. So my second question was towards what would be a successful example of regular investigation. And you guys took it to the impeachment, which I think it was a fresh take on the impeachment. So I thought that was an interesting way to look at it, and it harkens back to sort of question one concerns I had, which is impeachment doesn't necessarily have to lead to conviction to be effective. So I thought that was a nice touch. Would have been nice to see a different example on that. You guys, but to that point, you did reference in your opening statement the Fair Labor Standards Act and how Congress used its investigatory powers to get to that. And that's kind of what I was looking for in the more contemporary example. But I really appreciated that example. I thought it was a great example. You guys were very collaborative in your answers, shared the mic, and it was very smooth, which matters in this. If this is advocacy, you guys did an excellent job advocating your position. It was very clear, so thank you for that.
Very quickly, I think you did an excellent job. The 4-minute opening remarks were just spot on, hitting on contempt of Congress and subpoena power, and then as Robert alluded to, I think we were looking when we were asking the questions about other ways that Congress can use its powers was through the power of the purse by dealing with appropriations and with the budget. But I thought you did great. The mention of the EPA back in the 1980s, that was a very good example. And then again, I like the way that you summed up with saying that they were becoming less effective. And then during the Q&A, we got into some of the reasons why they are less effective with their oversight and investigatory powers. Overall, I thought you did a very good job. You got a lot of knowledge. You got a lot of leadership. Don't let this We the People program be a semester project or something you're doing in your classroom at this point in time. And don't forget about this, because we need to have leaders like you in Nebraska, and we need them throughout the country. So keep being good citizens, and congratulations to you, and best of luck. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great job. All right. I'm going to move the judges into their breakout room. Good luck for the rest of the day.